At 67, with a voice still etched by smoke, miles, and memory, Tanya Tucker finally lets the truth surface. Not in a headline, not on a stage, but in the quiet reckoning of a life lived too loudly to outrun its wounds. Fame came to her before adulthood, applause before safety, desire before understanding. She learned early how love could feel like rescue and ruin at the same time. And now, decades later, one name still echoes louder than the rest. One man still lives in the pauses between her words, in the songs she never explains, in the silences she never filled. He was not her longest relationship. He was not her safest. But he was the one her heart never released. Why does a love from the past still hold power over a woman who survived addiction, abandonment, and an industry that devours its own? And why does confessing it now feel more dangerous than saying it then? Because some loves don't fade, they wait. And this one has been waiting for her to finally speak. The house is quiet in a way that feels unfamiliar to someone who has lived most of her life surrounded by noise. Not the applause of sold-out arenas or the roar of crowds calling her name, but the softer sounds, the hum of air conditioning, the distant tick of a clock, the low creak of a wooden floor settling into age. Tanya Tucker sits alone, framed by walls that carry her history. Gold records catch the light like silent witnesses. Awards line the shelves, polished and permanent, proof that the world remembers her exactly as it chooses to remember legends. Yet none of it answers the weight pressing against her chest. At 67, reflection is no longer optional. It arrives uninvited, creeping into quiet moments, settling beside her when the distractions fade. She has survived what should have destroyed her. Addiction, scandal, the brutal impatience of an industry that devours its brightest stars. From the outside, the story looks complete. A child prodigy who burned fast, fell hard, and rose again. A woman who outlasted her demons and reclaimed her voice. But survival, she has learned, is not the same as resolution. There are nights when memory moves faster than intention. Hotel rooms resurface in her mind. Identical, anonymous, filled with silence so loud it rang in her ears after the crowds disappeared. The echo of cheers would still vibrate in her body, but no one remained to hear the quiet afterward. She remembers sitting on the edge of beds, boots still on, makeup half removed, staring at walls that never knew her name. Fame had taught her how to be seen, but never how to be held. And then there is him, not always clearly, sometimes only as a feeling, a sudden tightening in her chest when a certain song plays, or a pause she cannot explain when an interviewer asks about love. His absence hurt more deeply than the headlines ever did. More than the public spirals, more than the whispers that followed her through decades. Other losses faded with time. This one stayed sharp, preserved by everything left unsaid. Emotionally, she exists between gratitude and grief. Gratitude for a life that gave her purpose, music, and a voice that still carries weight. Grief for what that life demanded in return. Psychologically, the contradiction never resolved itself. The world rewarded her resilience, but never asked what it cost. She learned to endure, not to heal, to move forward without closing the doors behind her. The camera lingers on her face as she looks at an old photograph, creased at the edges, handled too many times to be accidental. Her expression does not soften, it tightens. This is not nostalgia. This is unfinished business. The narration deepens, suggesting what she herself has avoided naming. Her greatest confession will not be about substances or self-destruction. Those stories have already been told, dissected, archived. The truth waiting beneath all of it is quieter and far more dangerous. The truth of a love postponed, misaligned with timing and fear, never properly buried. The question hangs in the air, heavy and unresolved. Why now, after everything, does this truth refuse to stay silent? And what happens when a woman who spent her life singing finally decides to speak about the one thing music could never save her from? The answer has been waiting longer than she has been willing to admit. Long before reflection, before regret learned how to speak, there was a child standing under lights too bright for innocence. Tanya Tucker's voice arrived before her sense of safety ever had. While other children learned the rhythm of ordinary days, school bells, scraped knees, quiet dinners. Hers was shaped by late-night drives, rehearsed smiles, and adult expectations disguised as opportunity. Applause became the language of approval, and silence became something to fear. From the outside, it looked like destiny unfolding early. A prodigy with a voice older than her years, singing words weighted with longing she had not yet lived. But inside, the psychological imbalance was already forming. Love arrived conditionally. Praise replaced protection. Success came without instruction on how to survive it emotionally. Every stage taught her how to perform strength while quietly erasing vulnerability. The environments blurred together. Radio stations, recording studios, dimly lit venues smelling of smoke and anticipation. Adults spoke around her, rarely to her. Decisions were made quickly, confidently, always in her name. She learned that compliance kept the machine moving. That discomfort was temporary. That exhaustion was weakness. And that feelings, when inconvenient, could be swallowed. Loneliness did not announce itself loudly at first. It crept in during long car rides, when conversations faded and headlights cut endless tunnels through the dark. It lingered in hotel hallways where every door looked the same. Childhood, already fragile, slowly slipped out of reach. In its place grew a quiet hunger for grounding, for belonging, for someone who might look past the voice and see the child holding it together. Psychologically, this hunger became formative. It shaped what love would later mean to her. Not companionship, but rescue. Not balance, but intensity. The absence of emotional safety taught her to cling tightly when connection appeared, to mistake closeness for permanence. She learned to give everything quickly, because experience had taught her that nothing stayed for long. There were moments when the mask almost cracked. Brief flashes of defiance, of fatigue, of a child who wanted to stop being remarkable long enough to be real. But the machine did not slow. Success demanded forward motion, and so she learned to keep singing, even when the songs grew heavier than she understood. Foreshadowing settles quietly over the chapter. Every mile traveled, every expectation met too early, pulls her closer to a future where love will feel like oxygen. Necessary, overwhelming, and impossible to regulate. The emotional groundwork is laid long before the man arrives. Long before heartbreak takes a name. As the chapter closes, Tanya steps into adulthood carrying an invisible wound, shaped not by malice but by momentum. She does not yet know what she is missing. She only knows that when love finally finds her, she will hold on as if it is the first place she has ever felt safe. And she will not be prepared for what it will cost her when that safety begins to slip. He does not enter the story with spectacle. There is no dramatic announcement, no instant collision framed for mythology. He arrives quietly, almost deceptively ordinary, and that is precisely why he changes everything. For the first time in her life, Tanya Tucker feels something unfamiliar settle inside her chest. Not adrenaline, not ambition, not the electricity of a crowd, but steadiness. With him, the world does not ask her to perform. The connection forms in the negative space of her life, in the moments where the noise recedes. Away from cameras and contracts, she is not a voice or a brand. She is simply a woman learning how to exhale. He listens without rushing her, looks at her without measuring what she can give. Psychologically, this is seismic. For someone raised by applause, being seen without expectation feels like sanctuary. Love, when it takes hold, does so completely. Tanya does not approach it cautiously. She never learned how. Emotionally, she binds herself to the feeling of home he represents. Not a house or a place, but a state of being she has never known. Safety without silence, closeness without performance. The narrator frames this love not as infatuation, but as recognition. A sense that something long missing has finally found its shape. But intensity carries its own shadow. Her career does not slow simply because her heart has found rest. Tour dates stretch across calendars. Fame pulls at her relentlessly, demanding her presence elsewhere, always elsewhere. Distance creeps in, not dramatically, but incrementally. Missed calls, shortened conversations, growing misunderstandings. The very life that made her visible now threatens the intimacy she is desperate to protect. Psychologically, fear begins to surface. Fear of abandonment, sharpened by childhood instability, whispers that love must be held tightly or it will disappear. Tanya gives more, faster, louder, affection, loyalty, sacrifice, hoping devotion might anchor what distance threatens to loosen. But love under pressure does not always bend. Sometimes it fractures. The man she loves carries his own limits. He exists outside the machinery of fame, and the weight of her world begins to feel unlivable to him. Schedules replace spontaneity. Public scrutiny shadows private moments. What once felt grounding begins to feel consuming. Neither is wrong, but they are no longer aligned. The tragedy unfolds not in betrayal, but in incompatibility sharpened by timing. Scenes darken. Arguments end unresolved. Silence stretches longer between reunions. Tanya senses the shift before it is spoken, the way one senses a storm before clouds arrive. Emotionally, she fights it, clinging to the belief that love, once found, should be enough to survive anything. Psychologically, she cannot separate losing him from losing the only place she has ever felt truly safe. Foreshadowing tightens its grip. The narrator hints that this love, once fractured, will never be fully replaced, that its absence will echo through every chapter that follows, through addiction, chaos, and collapse. The man becomes a fixed point in her emotional memory, not because he stayed, but because he showed her what was possible. The breaking does not arrive with finality. There is no clean ending, no decisive goodbye. Instead, the relationship erodes slowly, painfully, leaving questions unanswered and wounds unclosed. Love fades from presence but not from impact. As the chapter closes, Tanya is left standing in the aftermath of something she does not yet understand how to mourn. The man who made her feel at home is slipping beyond reach, and she does not yet realize that this loss, unfinished, unresolved, will follow her far longer than the love itself ever did. The rise does not pause for grief. As the love that once steadied her dissolves into absence, Tanya Tucker's career surges forward with unforgiving momentum. Stages grow larger. Expectations sharpen. The industry celebrates her resilience without noticing the fracture forming beneath it. From the outside, she looks unstoppable. Inside, something essential has gone missing, and no amount of success knows how to replace it. The silence he leaves behind becomes unbearable. Not dramatic at first, just persistent. It follows her into dressing rooms and down hotel corridors, settles beside her in the early hours when sleep refuses to come. Psychologically, she searches for substitutes. Anything to quiet the ache. Anything to recreate the feeling of being anchored. Fame offers distraction, but not relief. Applause fills rooms, not wounds. Substances enter quietly, almost politely. They promise rest. They promise control. They promise escape from a mind that refuses to let go of what it lost. Tanya does not fall all at once. She drifts. One night becomes many. One coping mechanism becomes a dependency. The narrator frames this not as rebellion, but as grief mismanaged, love unresolved and metabolized as self-destruction. Publicly, the narrative hardens. Headlines reduce complexity to spectacle. She becomes a cautionary tale, a familiar arc the world feels entitled to consume. What remains unseen is the emotional logic beneath it all. The way heartbreak can hollow a person until they begin filling themselves with anything available. The man she loved is never far from her thoughts, though his name is rarely spoken. He exists as an internal presence, a reference point for what she lost and never reclaimed. Psychological pressure mounts as fame turns predatory. Mistakes are magnified. Vulnerability is monetized. Each stumble becomes confirmation of a story others are eager to tell. Tanya feels watched, judged, stripped of privacy at the very moment she needs shelter most. Isolation deepens. Trust erodes. The distance between who she is and who the world sees grows unmanageable. Scenes grow darker. Late nights blur into early mornings. The mirror becomes an adversary, She recognizes herself less and less, yet cannot stop moving forward. To pause would require confronting the grief beneath the chaos, and that feels more dangerous than continuing to fall. Emotionally, she is suspended between shame and defiance, aware of the damage, unsure how to stop it. The narrator lingers on the cost of endurance. Survival becomes mechanical. She learns how to function while unraveling, how to show up while disappearing internally. The love she once believed could save her now feels like a distant memory she is afraid to examine too closely. To name it would mean acknowledging that its loss reshaped everything that followed. As the chapter closes, Tanya stands at the edge of collapse. Not yet broken, but dangerously close. The world waits for either a tragedy or a redemption arc, indifferent to the reality that both require passing through unbearable darkness first. The question hangs unresolved in the heavy air. How much can a person lose before there is nothing left to numb? And what happens when the pain finally demands to be felt? Time does not erase what is unfinished. It only changes how loudly it speaks. The final chapter returns to Tanya Tucker in the present. Older now, steadier, carrying a body and voice shaped by survival. The chaos has quieted. The addictions no longer dictate her days. The industry, once merciless, now treats her with reverence reserved for legends who endured long enough to be forgiven. On paper, this is redemption. But internally, something remains unresolved, waiting patiently beneath the calm. Healing did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, moments of clarity, stretches of sobriety, the slow rebuilding of trust with herself. Tanya learned how to stand without crutches, how to face mornings without running from them. Yet even as her life stabilized, one truth resisted resolution. The love she lost did not fade with recovery. It lingered, transformed, no longer painful in the way it once was, but still deeply present. Psychologically, she begins to understand it differently. That love was never meant to last in form, only in impact. It showed her what safety felt like, what being chosen without performance could be. And because it arrived only once, it became irreplaceable. Other relationships followed. None erased the imprint. Some wounds close. Others become part of the architecture of who a person becomes. The narration frames her confession not as regret, but as recognition. She is no longer trying to reclaim the past or rewrite its ending. She is naming it. For decades, she carried the truth quietly, protecting it from public consumption, from reduction, from misunderstanding. To speak it now is not to reopen the wound, but to finally acknowledge its shape. Emotionally, this act is both liberating and sobering. Love, she realizes, does not always align with timing or longevity. Sometimes its purpose is singular, to reveal something essential, then leave. The man she loved is not portrayed as a missed future, but as a completed chapter that never stopped influencing the pages that followed. Legacy comes into focus. Tanya's story is no longer only about survival or success. It is about emotional honesty deferred and finally reclaimed. By naming the love that never left, she reclaims authorship over her inner life, separating her truth from the narratives imposed on her for decades. The camera lingers on her in stillness. No stage, no spotlight, just a woman at peace with complexity. The confession does not resolve everything. It does not offer reunion or closure in the traditional sense. Instead, it opens something quieter and deeper, acceptance. Yet the final note is intentionally unresolved. Because even now, with words finally spoken, one question remains suspended between past and present. When a love shapes an entire life without staying in it, does it ever truly end, or does it simply wait, timeless, for the moment it is finally allowed to be acknowledged? The answer is left for the silence to hold.